Okay, everybody, I think we're going to get started with our career and interview workshop panel. Hopefully that won't happen again. But welcome, everybody, and grab some pizza and Pepsi if you haven't already. Thank you for coming. We're going to do this in an hour, and our goal is to try to have a pretty wide-ranging conversation about topics pertaining to resumes and interviewing, with the benefit of experience from our expert panelists here, who are all LTU grads. And so unfortunately, we had a bit broader aspirations for this, but two of our panelists are going to be unable to join us, and so we're going to be a little shorthanded, but I think we'll cover it. So let me take a minute to introduce everyone before we get started. Hopefully you know who I am. I'm Dale Geyer. I'm the chair of the architecture department, and I teach various history classes here. To my left is Kevin Adkins, AIA and NCARB, who's the founder and principal of, is it AdRoom Architecture and Design? AdRoom Architecture and Design. He also has degrees from LTU and the University of Illinois at Chicago. Kevin is a licensed architect and has worked with practices in Michigan, Illinois, and California in a variety of programs and scales. He's also been a lecturer at the University of Michigan, and he served as a board member with the AIA Huron Valley chapter. To Kevin's left is Marilyn Cannell, who graduated from LTU in 2016 with a BFA in graphic design. She currently works as the lead visual designer for Chevrolet infotainment systems at General Motors. Marilyn works across a multidisciplinary team to design and implement digital cultures and touch screens across the entire cockpit experience. Additionally, Marilyn has been an adjunct professor here with us for many years, teaching UX, UI, and digital product design. To her left is Brian Gorzynski, AIA, who is the vice president of architecture at Studio 5 and Partners and another LTU grad. During his career, Brian has received accolades for projects that he has been associated with, including design awards from the AIA and Build America. He's taught design studios at both the University of Illinois and here at LTU. And he's currently a host member of the LTU Ross Scholarship Committee and a frequent participant in our LTU architecture design juries. And to his left, finally, is Tiffany Shamoon of the Office of Career Services here at LTU, someone you should get to know very well, and an office that you should get to know very well and should be participating in frequently. And unfortunately, I don't have a bio for her, but she does have a small announcement to make before we get started.
Hi, everyone. So, as you all know, my name is Tiffany. I'm a Career Services Advisor here at the university. Our goal is really to ensure that all of you become career ready before you even graduate. So our office provides services that include resume writing, cover letter writing, and my favorite, interview practice. So if you have an interview coming up and you're a little bit nervous about how to handle it or really how to even network with those employers to demonstrate your skills, you book an appointment with our office and we will conduct those interviews with you so that you can feel prepared when you do enter into that office, okay? You can book all of your appointments on Handshake. Our office has 3 advisors. We are there Monday through Friday from 8:30 to 4:30 p.m. Okay. One quick announcement that I do want to make is an event that we have coming up. I will leave these flyers on the table. This is called our company crawl event. We are working closely with the city of Southfield. Transportation will be provided. It is from 1 to 5 p.m. where we will be taking architecture and design students to local organizations right here in the city of Southfield, where you guys can hear a presentation, take a company tour, and just meet the professionals that work at that organization. It's a nice way for you to just experience what a day in the life would feel like at one of these organizations. From 4 to 5 p.m., we will then be going to the Skyline Club, which is again right here in the city of Southfield, for an hour of networking. Beverages and light snacks will be included, okay? The cost is free to attend. So if you're interested, just email our department and we will get you registered, okay? It really, really is a nice event. I always tell my students To have a company open up its doors on a regular day to have you all come in is fantastic. So you want to take advantage when you can. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have a long list of questions that are far too long to get to today, and so I'm going to use them to stimulate a conversation, and I think roughly we can maybe divide this about 1/3 into resumes and 2/3 into interviewing. So I want to start with resumes, and the notion is that I'll ask a question and our panelists can respond, and then if you guys have a follow-up, please feel free to join in or a related question. So I want to start with the resume, and kind of, I think we all know that resumes are really important, but do you guys have any advice on what you should and shouldn't put in a resume? Open question for the panel.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for coming, everyone. It's a fine art for sure. You can easily overdo it, and you certainly don't want to undercook it. So first, I want to say take advantage of what Tiffany offered and use that office. That's a great resource for all of you. It's fantastic that that's here. One thing I like to say about resumes is a lot of you are designers, visual people. So there's no reason that a resume can't reflect design, can't look good. I've seen a lot of resumes over the years, and a lot of them look like they didn't come from somebody with design intent or design aspirations. And I think that tells a lot about an architect or future architect. So consider not only the content of a resume, but also the way it looks. And the entire presentation package, your website if you have one, your portfolio, your resume, can all tie together. They can all have a relationship to one another, not look like they were done by different people at different times. So consider the way things look as well as what's in them. But as far as content, typically I think to keep it to the point, concise, but include as much relative material as you can, even if you've done curricular activities in college and high school, things you volunteered for, boards that you've served on, people you've helped in volunteer manners. All of that speaks to your character and can help.
I can piggyback off that, Kevin. I was going to say a similar thing about the visuals, right? Coming from a graphic design background, that's extremely important because that's what we learn in school, right? We learn typography, layout. And if someone has a stack, say, of 100 resumes to look at, they turn the page and see one where the alignment is just slightly off, it might be a reason to just discard it, right? And you don't want that to be the reason. The one reason, right, that you're not chosen is an alignment error, right? So attention to detail is going to be very important. Additionally, I think it's really important to add your skills. That could be communication skills. It also could be leadership skills, could be software skills. One thing I would shy away from, and I'm sure there's people who might argue against this, but I've seen on people's resumes where they'll rate themselves 0 out of 10 on software skills, personal skills. And you don't want to do that. You don't want any potential employer to have a reason to be like, well, they're 6 out of 10 on Adobe Photoshop, so next, right? I think adding those skills and then speaking to them if you get an interview is going to be very important. But don't sell yourself short by rating yourself.
Yeah, I would caution, the opportunity is, it is a design problem. And like some designs, they get a little overdone as opposed to just enough and not enough. So you got to kind of analyze it. And you know, my background when looking at resumes is at a relatively large scale. So I've been in rooms with colleagues where we stick 80 of them on a wall. And without even reading them, we eliminate them by the color of paper, alignment errors, overboard, not concise, difficult to follow. So sadly enough, half of the resumes you get are gone in the first 10 minutes just from a visual impact. And in the days prior to all this electronic stuff, and you guys are bringing in electronic portfolios, it would be the color of the paper, you know, a pink resume, a powder blue resume. From the world I come from, those were gone right away. Anything that was like over graphic, and you have to caution the commentary I think we're all going to get, because I'm a pure architect as opposed to someone who works in a graphics field. So those fields will be looking for something slightly different. So I can see in a graphics resume where that's an opportunity to display your skill set. In an architectural resume, it's a way to create some interest to set yourself apart. It's also a trap when it's overdone and heavy and not a sensitive piece of work is really, what I would caution against. And part of what you assess, and we'll talk about this in the interview process, is trying to get a flavor of who the individual is in that resume, not just your qualifications. We can list qualifications all day long, but part of after qualifications is how is this person going to fit in the environment that we work in? And there are some clues you can see, in resumes about how it works. So the most difficult piece of the puzzle is to convey the human touch of who you are, what your personality is, and how you'd fit in an environment. It's very difficult, but we'll talk about that in the interview process.
It's interesting that you guys mentioned the appearance of the resume, because as you guys, some of you know, I'm a historian and I'm not a designer, and my colleagues are constantly making fun of my PowerPoints and my documents and all the other stuff because there's no design in it. And so sometimes I'll try to do like a really good job in a PowerPoint and they'll still laugh at me, and I feel bad, but I get it. Like you guys, and I say that strangely, I guess, see things differently than other people do. So as a historian without a design background, I see things differently than you do. And so what I think might be attractive or appropriate, maybe not so. So I think the message here is to think about your audience, as was pointed out. Like you may want to go a little further with a graphic design resume, whereas in an architecture office, that's going to get you in the trash can really fast. So based on the resume, and you've worked it out, you've put yourself into it, you've got it perfected, well, what do you do next? Where do you determine where to send your resume? And I guess that's could be a combination of personal experience and then professional experience.
Well, one great advantage is if you happen to know anybody in that organization, it is beneficial to avoid the HR department if possible, because they see so much. They tend to be not of the professional background that the position is looking for. So it's friends or knowing distance or telephone calls to whomever in that organization that looks like they'll be doing interviewing, introducing yourself and asking some questions. That'd be the biggest one. Otherwise, my fear as an architect, especially for larger architectural organizations, there is a natural filter set up as those resumes move through the system that aren't always viewed by architects or necessarily even the individual that will hire you. So there's a caution there, and it's not always possible. And what I'm trying to get you guys to avoid is that one of 100 resumes on a wall and we're tearing them off because of the color of the paper, or it's Helvetica Bold Extended and that was 1970s graphic. So it's really difficult. So the network, your instructors, anybody that can ping that system in advance beyond answering the ad is a great way to think about attacking the problem.
I think it's really important to have easy, accessible resume online. So say you're out in the wild or you're at school one day and you meet someone in your profession and you want to give them your resume. Are you always going to have a resume in your back pocket, folded up, and you can hand it? No, but you could have a QR code ready, a business card ready, some way to share digitally your resume or portfolio as well with someone. And you don't always have to have it if it's online. So make sure you have either a website, a LinkedIn, somewhere online hosting that resume so that it's ready whenever you need it.
Yeah, that's all great advice, and I'll continue on with the networking conversation, because it's never too early to start networking, to get to know people in all facets of the industry you're going in, and you just never know where a cup of coffee might lead. When I came out of Lawrence Tech in '95, I moved to Chicago immediately. with no job. I don't know what I was doing, but I just moved. I had a few $100 and I needed a job. And I was just sending resumes everywhere without much sense of what it was that I wanted to actually do. I just knew I needed a job. So I was sending resumes to all the big firms because at the time that's all I knew about. One night I had coffee with a friend who happened to know a residential architect, and 3 days later I had an interview, and the next week I had a job. And that job sort of launched what I ended up doing my entire career, and what I'm doing now is working in small firms. I learned that who knows what would have happened if one of those early resumes would have worked and I ended up at SOM or Perkins & Will or something. I would have never known the love of working for small firms and doing residential work. So I think analyze carefully what it is that you want to do, what kind of career you want, where do you want to work, and then select where you want to send your resume based on that.
On the topic of networking, don't think about networking as something you're going to do when you're graduating. You're networking now. Your classmates now in 10 years could be a hiring manager at a firm you want to work at, right? My first agency role as a designer, and agencies are notoriously hard to get into, I got because one of my classmates was working as a copywriter there. She posted on LinkedIn, hey, we have a designer role open. I sent her my resume right away. Boom, top of the stack. They told me later they had 200 people apply, but I was on the top of the stack because I was a referral. So keep in mind the connections you're making now are super important as professional connections you're going to make in the future.
Tiffany, did you have anything you want to add?
I would say, of course, networking is huge. Always remember that your name is your brand. So that goes inside the classroom and outside of the classroom. So even how all of you are carrying yourselves on social media, right? You can bet that an employer may look you up on social media. So you want to make sure that you're not putting anything out there that would want to turn them away, okay? You want to keep it as professional as possible. In terms of the resume, keep it relevant. I always tell my students, print out the job post, highlight what they're looking for, and show them how you can give them that. Doesn't need to just be with work. It could be with academic projects, things you've done in the classroom, and volunteer experience. But the key is really finding out what is it that they're looking for, and how can I demonstrate in some way I have that skill.
How many architects are here? Just curious. Okay. Back early on, once you know yourself and what your skill set is, you know, I had different resumes for different positions. If it was a technical position, especially in the field of architecture, and that was considered a strength, that resume would be a little bit different in terms of its content as it relates to a design position, and even the way it might look, because the inherent individual who's looking at that has got a little bit different mindset. And you know, I'm going to be speaking mostly from large firm kind of stuff, but the idea is that the department head or the individual that is more put a building together is looking for a different set of qualifications than someone who is upfront early creating and playing in tracing paper with a felt pen, if you guys still do that. But so just keep in mind that that resume isn't necessarily universal and can be honed and tuned very quickly to the position. The other thing is, you know, some of us believe we are better at certain things than we actually are, and you probably want to take a good hard look at yourself and understand the skill sets that you've acquired, not being negative or positive, but there are strengths and there are weaknesses, and the idea of attacking jobs that relate to your strength is a higher batting average than ones that, you know, are not. And some of your professors can help you go through that. Those kind of evaluations, at least in the world of architecture, by looking at a portfolio and having an hour-long conversation, even with myself after this, sometime you want to set up a meeting, it is a very simple thing to tune and get an outside look on what a potential interviewer would think your skill set is best suited for.
And if you're looking, especially for design, if there's a lot of different facets you can work in. You can be in branding, you can be in motion graphics, you can be in UX, UI. Say you're in branding and you really want to get into a UX, UI role, you're probably going to tweak your resume to reflect those skills needed. You might even put an objective at the top that says, looking to get an entry level role in UX UI, explain that you're trying to make a career transition. Otherwise, if you're using the same resume that you use to get into a branding role, the hiring manager for UX UI role is gonna look at it and say, well, those skills don't match, next, right? So you can tweak little things, even just take small bits out of that job description that you're applying to and add it to your resume. You're gonna have a better chance of landing that interview that way.
And I would say, kind of related to that, make sure that you check over your resume, your letter, everything before you send it out, and try not to sort of create sort of a mass resume that's applicable to everyone. Because the problem is, and I'm sure we've all seen this, resumes come in and you could tell it wasn't quite for this job, or it doesn't line up for this job. Or in the cover letter, it'll mention another job or another university. Like it was a form letter that somebody sent out and just filled in University of Michigan, Lawrence Tech. But then they forgot to change it from Michigan to Tech. So they sent me a letter saying, like, I always wanted to work for the University of Michigan. I'm thinking, well, okay, good luck with that. Because you didn't take a few minutes to look over your work. So that's about sort of checking your work, but also the mentality. As they've said, really tailor your materials to that particular job. Don't just create a resume and a cover letter and all that for a job in architecture. That's your starting point. Then you tweak it for each particular opportunity.
You can even tailor your portfolio. It's really easy if you're making one online. So say you are making a transition into a different type of role and that's what you want to do, put those relevant projects at the top, right? You can move that content around depending on what you're applying to and who you think is going to be looking at it. And let me tell you, we're probably going to look at the first 2 or 3 projects, maybe 3. So put the relevant projects up there first.
Do you all have any questions about resumes before we move into interviews? No? Okay, well, let's move into interviews. So we've successfully created a resume and a cover letter, and we've sent it out, and we've tailored our message appropriately, and we're fortunate enough to get an interview. So what kind of questions are they going to ask in an interview? Or I guess what kinds of questions would you ask as a potential employer in an interview?
Let me jump in here real quick. I think before that before that interview, there is a bunch of homework to do for you guys about, say you're interviewing with me, who am I? What is my organization? What does it do? It was always nice knowing that someone had done some research and can actually mention a project. Oh, by the way, why did you blah, blah, blah on this building? Or, you know, I was really interested in part of why I wanted to interview with you is because I saw an article on this building, or I drove by this house or something like that. So there's a lot of legwork to do. With the connectivity of the world today, you can probably even get to the individual that you're going to be meeting with. You know what I mean? And during that interview, to do some research, you can tell the people that are coming in cold, coming in blind, or don't have a clue what the organization behind any of us is really about in terms of its overall strategy, look on life, how it treats its workforce, all those kind of things. Ultimately, it will be important to all you guys. So there is a bunch of homework to do before you get in there. And I guess we'll continue with what.
Usually the first question, tell me about yourself, right? I like to use that question as an opportunity just to show my personality, show that I'm a confident person, talk about the types of things I like to do outside of work, keep that brief, and then I'll go into my job history. But usually I would say that's 9 times out of 10. First question, tell me about yourself. So be prepared for that one. Don't be caught off guard. You know yourself best, right? So.
Yeah, is first aid a good analogy? Almost, but you know the technical information everybody's going to be looking for, you've already given to us. We've chosen you based on what you wrote down. You know, now it's back to that. How are they going to fit in my organization? What clues to their personality, insight, and other strengths they might have come out of that interview? That's really what this interview is. It's a personality test more than a clarification of technical correctness or you know, quizzing you on your project. So unless generally ask specifically about a project, you wouldn't kind of reinterpret your resume verbally to someone. It's really about conveying who I am, what my personality's like, my sense of humor, or lack thereof, and those kind of things, you know?
Yeah, especially the higher up you get in the interview process. So you might start with who might be your potential boss or some potential coworkers, and then you might have another round where it's their boss, maybe another round where it's the boss's boss. The higher up you get, they're trusting the people below them that, okay, they passed them along, they can do the job. The people higher up are looking to see, do you fit well with the company? I had an interview where I finally made it to the VP of design, and he sat down and his first and only question was, what's your favorite movie and why? And that caught me off guard because I was not prepared to talk about movies in that interview. But we actually had a very good conversation about Forrest Gump. And we talked for probably like 30 minutes. And 30 minutes of a VP's time is very precious. That's a lot of time for that person to spend talking about a movie. But they're really just getting the idea, is this person going to get along with the vibe of the current team? Are they motivated? They can tell a lot by a conversation that doesn't even relate to the role itself. So you might get some of those out-of-the-box questions, and that's going to be relating to, do you fit?
Yeah. At the same time, I think there are questions that you can't be asked. So when you're asked to tell about yourself, there are certain things that you're not expected to divulge. And if somebody asks too specifically, it's okay to not answer these questions. And I think Tiffany's office can probably guide you to which questions, it's probably obvious, but which questions you don't have to answer. But these guys are right. It's an interview is a lot about personality and getting to know you, maybe not even necessarily for the position you're interviewing for right now, but analyzing you to say, in 2 years, am I going to be able to put this person in front of a client? Do they have that personality? Do they have that, that conversational skill? Do they have that thing? So as people are, some of the questions are going to seem out of left field, but maybe they're asking about things that they're thinking about for your future already, or the next step up. For me, the toughest questions were always about a weakness. Tell me about a weakness that you have, and about salary. Salary is the tough one. I've never been able to answer that one right. They want to know what your salary expectations are, but the weakness question is very valid, and you need to be prepared to answer that, and answer that truthfully. Something about your skill set, about your just workability, your situation. It's something. There's something. Not everybody is perfect, right? So there's something that's a weakness, and just be ready for that and willing to talk about it. Salary, you just have to do your research based on your field, based on your skill set, based on your experience level, but have something in mind, something to talk about at least.
Yeah, and keep in mind when at an entry level, there's an educational curve that you're going to get beyond the pure academics. They're going to be looking at, where can I take this guy? This is how we work. Every organization, to me, it doesn't matter if it's architectural or automotive, but there is an idea that you don't obviously know everything you know, and part of our job is to make you understand more about what we're doing. So there's a big growth curve coming, and the idea of where could this guy end up is a frequent conversation that takes place. Interesting salary thing. So they sent what was your scariest moment? So one of my first interviews, postgraduate work, I had the job more or less in hand, and we're discussing salary, right? So I was prepared, after doing the research, knowing what it takes in the area I was looking at, I was prepared to talk about dollars per hour, okay? And they went right to annual. And this is my very first interview. So I found myself, at the end of the day, losing about $4,000 in the translation between an hourly rate and a salary. Okay, so the key word is, forget the small numbers, it's 2,000 hours a year times your hourly rate. And I can remember sitting after the interview disappointed in myself because I'd done the math after I'd accepted the job and realized that no wonder they took me, I went backwards. It was just a few grand, but the point is you're so wrapped up in securing this job, not knowing if that offer's coming this interview, don't be surprised if there's several. And for me, it came at that interview, and I was not ready to translate, let alone even, know what quickly mathematically was happening to me, and beyond the benefit package and all that kind of stuff. So that was the one thing that I regret, is it caught me completely off guard, because dollars per hour, I had it all figured out. I knew what the cost of living was. I'm living in downtown Chicago, didn't grow up there. I had this all figured out. And they said, well, what about so many thousand a year? And I'm like, I don't know, what does that mean? And all of a sudden you find yourself drifting doing math.
I would add, don't sell yourself short, especially first job out of college. Do your research, find out your value. And if the offer doesn't match that value, you don't have to take that job. You have the ability to negotiate, and there's gonna be other opportunities too. And then you have more leverage once you're past that, your first professional job. Then you have a little bit more leverage. An employer might ask to disclose what you're currently making. I would advise to not share that. I think that's one of those things where that's none of their business during that process. But don't be afraid to stand your ground. I had a phone interview with an agency, and I gave them a number, and they said, oh, that's not within our range. And I said, okay, I can't move forward in this process. I'm not going to be undercut on what I'm expecting, right? So don't be afraid to stand your ground for that. Also, on top of research, you mentioned benefits. This is going to be your first time experiencing a benefits package, 401k matching, all that fun stuff. That stuff can be really valuable. Take a look at how much is your health insurance going to cost you a month. If it's going to cost you $120 a month versus some employers, it's $40 a month. That's a big difference. What's your deductible? Is it $6,000? Is it $3,000? Those things can add up and make a really big difference, and you'll learn that as you go through multiple jobs and understand how that works. But do your research on that as well. And Glassdoor is a great place to go, where you can see company reviews and their benefit packages. So if you're even getting an offer from one company, early stages in another company, you can still get kind of some insights on that other company, and be able to compare and know what's more valuable for me.
I just wanted to add that definitely expect the unexpected in an interview. In practice and mock interviews and anything that you can do is helpful. I think even when you're sitting around at studio at night, not sure what to do, just ask each other goofball questions about work, about things, and just develop that sense of how to answer on the spot. The greatest question I've ever asked in an interview caught me so off guard, and I was offended at first, but then I realized this is an excellent question. Halfway through the interview, going through my resume, or my portfolio, and he sits back and he says, "Is this the best you can do?" And I thought, whoa, what does that mean? And then he dug in a little bit more and said, "Is this the best you can do, or the best you've been allowed to do so far?" And I thought, that's a really good question. As an architect, we want to do our own thing. We always think we can push a client further, but then there's budgets and all kinds of things that hold us down. So that was a really good question, and I think you read my face that I didn't know how to answer that. So just spitball with each other, ask goofy questions, ask whatever you can think of, and just kind of learn the art of rebuttal, learn the art of thinking on your feet and answering.
Yeah, my experience was kind of similar, where I was coming out of law school and I was interviewing regularly, and I had a kind of standard approach, and all these interviews sort of followed a very similar fashion. And then I went for one and met the guy, and we shook hands, and he said, "Okay, well, tell me, what are the last 5 books you read?" And it completely knocked me off my track, just having to try to think about it, and then, wait, when did I read that? And then say something intelligent about it. But it was the best interview I ever had, because he found a way to knock me off of my pre-align, or whatever you want to call it. I was ready, I had an approach, and he forced me to abandon that approach, and therefore was able to get more at who I am. And so this goes along with that, when they ask you to tell you about yourself, that is an incredible opening. And they don't want to hear, well, I'm hardworking, I'm really good, I really want this job. I mean, everybody says that, and a certain amount of that, obviously you want the job because you're here. This is your opportunity in just a few minutes to try to get across some kind of personality. And so I know we talked about this a little bit, but maybe we could flesh that out for a minute or two, like approaches you could have before coming in, if anticipating a question, tell me about yourself, like what kinds of things should you bring up? And I know just within the vague boundaries of this is your chance to show your personality, like what does that mean and where does it, how do you confine that?
And just to add one quick thing to that, yes, we're going to say we're hardworking, we're going to say we have great communication skills, we know how to problem solve. But if you can back that up with a real world example, you're driving home the point so much more. So I tell my students before the interview, think about a time when you had to problem solve. Think about a time when you were working with somebody who wasn't the easiest to work with. How did you overcome that? Think about a time when you had to be a team player and go the extra mile. Because then in the interview process, you're not just telling the employer that you have those skills, you're actually providing them with a real situation about when you had to do that. And it's really going to show your value so much more. So a lot of times you got to brainstorm all of the great things about who you are as an individual and what skills and what accomplishments you've made before you even step foot into that interview.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. It's really good to bring stories. Storytelling is a great method to talk about your process, how you are as a person. You know, if you're talking about a situation where you had a group assignment, did you take the leadership role in that group assignment, or did you help manage the team and figure out the tasks? You're going to help that employer understand what type of a team player you are. There's this acronym called STAR. I don't know, I see some heads shaking. I might need some help remembering all of them. But STAR, I learned about this when I interviewed at GM. They actually told me, be prepared to use the STAR method for the interview. So S stands for situation. So they will ask specific questions like, name a situation where you failed and talk about it. So S is situation. T is the task. So what tasks out of that situation or project were you responsible for? A, action, yes, thank you. Action is what actions did you take? That could be before, during, and after that process. And then R is a result. So what was the result of the actions you took? And applying that to a question like name a time that you failed is very, very difficult. So being prepared with, talking about problem solving, times that you failed or times that things went really well. Have a couple of stories in your back pocket, because when I was asked that question, I was like, oh, really good question. I had to pause for a second to give myself some time to think. I wasn't prepared to describe a situation I failed. I was prepared to describe my weaknesses, and those are two very different things. So yes, have those in your back pocket ready to go.
And I guess you shouldn't just say, I've never failed, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
then they know you're lying.
Yeah, because I think we're all going to fail, guaranteed. It's how you recover and respond, especially to a client or a boss. It's okay, the problem happened. Now, what steps did you take to resolve those things is really part of the task that we'd be looking for. It's not like, okay, I did this. Well, what did you do to fix it? Well, I just didn't do anything. That's not a good answer. It's like, take the task, solve the problem. And you'll find it, especially as you get older, client bases work that same way. We're all going to make a mistake. It's really how you respond after the mistake that you earn the trust or the disrespect of whatever individual is on the other side of the fence.
One of the answer I like best when asking that question in an interview is when people sort of describe their path and how they got to that table. So it's personal, but it's also professional, right? So you guys are here, you're working hard, you're spending a lot of money to be here, so I'm assuming you have passion for what you do. You really want to do it. So when I say, tell me about yourself, tell me about how you got to the same table with me. Like, did it start when you were a kid? Did you have for me, I don't know how to do anything else. Architect was just in me I drew plans for a snow fort before I'd let my friends work on it in the yard and they get angry waiting for me. So I tell those stories. It's just ingrained in me. It's part of who I am. So I think just carry that passion with you, because an interviewer is going to want to know that. They're going to want to know that you're not just there looking for a job, but you're there looking for a career. You're looking for a method to continue the passion, right?
So we've touched on this a little bit, but maybe we could pursue it a little further. What kinds of questions should one ask in an interview? We know that a lot of it is them going to be asking you questions, but inevitably there comes a point in which they ask for your questions, and you need to have some good ones. So what kinds of things would you suggest?
I think it's important to remember that an interview is a two-way street, right? They're interviewing you to see if you're a good fit, but you're also trying to find out, is this company a good fit for me? So take some time to figure out maybe what kind of values are important to you in a role and see if that company aligns with you. That might be hybrid working, being able to work at home or in the office. It might be asking, is there room for me to grow in this position? For me as a woman, I ask about equity, gender equity, how they're handling that. And their answer is very telling to me. Is this the right fit for me? But remember that you have every right to ask some very important questions too when it comes that time when they say, do you have any questions for us, right? So you definitely want to evaluate yourself. Does this company align with what I'm looking for?
Yeah, and I think it's okay as well to ask about not only the job you're interviewing for at the time, but what career paths there are beyond that. I think as an interviewer, I'm always happy when somebody asks about future longevity with the company. But one of my favorite questions is just asking them to tell me what a typical day is like. So walk me through a day. What am I going to do here? Like, how does that work? And not every job has a typical day, but something somewhat typical. Like they should be able to walk you through something similar. Of course, it's going to vary. But I like asking that question, and I like getting that question.
Yeah, actually, at a larger scale, a lot of the firms, even at a small scale, everybody tends to specialize these days. You know, it's a building type. It's not the general practice of architecture, very rarely. So, you know, when you're there, and it's a healthcare firm, you know, why are you interested in healthcare? What's passionate about the healthcare piece to you? If it's a multidisciplinary firm, market sectors, and being able to talk about which market sector, education, healthcare, corporate office, why are you interested in the specifics of what the building type that interview may entail? And that's a good telling story. I've had people say that, you know, I really love schools because it gives back to a community at a small scale. It impacts people every day. You know, and you can tell I've talked about this before, but the idea is that, especially in a firm that specializes, why that building type is important to you. And does it ring personal to you, and why? And that's, again, just expressing a different type of passion for the product itself rather than the organization that's helping design that product.
You might want to also ask, what challenges might I see in this role? Additionally, you could ask, you know, the person who previously had this role, did they leave for another role? Did they, you know, get promoted within the company? And their answer could be really telling. It's okay to ask some of those tough questions that are going to be tough for the interview to answer. You want to understand what the culture is going to be like when things get difficult. How is the company going to handle it? Stuff like that.
And I would say those kinds of questions demonstrate your interest in this particular job as well. Like, anybody who's ever done interviews has encountered someone who just wants a job, and you can tell. And they'll happily take this job if you offer it to them, but they'll take any job. And there's a big difference between that person and the person who comes in and wants to work for you and has specific questions, like, what happened to my predecessor? What can I be looking for in 10 years? What would my life be like then? What do I do on a daily basis?
Yeah. And while it's important to eventually get to the topic of salary, benefits, vacation time, you don't want to ask that too early. You want to be interested in the position, the firm, learning more about what you'll be doing. That stuff will come later. Let that rest. It'll come up at a later time. Of course, definitely important to learn it at some point, but don't ask too early. It's going to seem like you're just interested in a job, not necessarily that job. I've been interviewed by somebody who started talking about that very early, or started salaries are this, or vacation time is this, and I didn't know. They didn't tell me anything about the job or the firm yet. So that told me they were just looking for bodies, right? They just needed to fill CAD seats. They weren't necessarily interested in me and what I had to offer. They just needed somebody. So that was a turnoff to me, actually. So that question can go both ways.
Yeah, have a list of red flags. That's a major red flag if that comes up really early. Another red flag is you might notice that there's a lot of turnover. You can ask, what's the average, tenure of someone here? If it's less than 2 years, it's probably not a good thing. If it's a lot longer, that's great. People stay because they're happy, right? So have a list of deal breakers or red flags and keep an eye out for those, because if it shows up a little bit in the interview, chances are a year into the job, 2 years in the job, it's probably going to become a big problem.
Yeah, I might take a different tack at that one, just because of the nature of the architectural beast, if you will. But first of all, I don't think it's uncommon for young architects to probably have more jobs than their parents, in that you'll work for multiple companies. And even the panel is diverse with houses and larger scale projects. I think it's important for you guys, first of all, to understand this is not a union position. You're not going to be there for life. One could argue it's not a job when you're an architect, it's a way of life, and it's the passion that separates the way of life from the job. Now, there are architectural jobs out there, don't get me wrong. If you want a 9 to 5, probably less than on the creative end of what we do for a living, there are positions for that, and it's badly needed. And then there are those who live this thing like a way of life, and that's a different individual with a different set of goals and mindsets. And what I can tell you is, and I'm sure you heard the adage, but if you're passionate about what you're doing and enjoy it, you'll never work a day in your life. And that gets to the point about money. I mean, money to survive, money is what you make of it, right? And I can tell you it'll come, although most of you as architects later in your careers. But the idea of being happy with what you're doing, the type of things you're doing, is probably the most important piece of the puzzle. And with that will come the passion, and believe me, the money will follow. It happens. It just takes a little longer. And you need to be patient.
Yeah, there's a lot of grunt work, I would describe it, in design. Putting in your time, yeah. When you, at least coming from my background, when you get your first job, you're not going to have a bunch of creative control immediately, right? It's an entry level role, so I have the expectations that it might not seem like a ton of fun at first, and it's going to be a lot of people handing you work that might seem like busy work, but it's going to build you up to get to that point in your career. Maybe it takes a couple years where you do start getting to make those creative decisions and strategic decisions as well. So I think that's good to keep in mind when you are interviewing, right? Understanding the potential growth. If you're in a production level role, understanding what that means. But is there potential for me to get into a more strategic role, or role where I have a say? So that's also speaks to what you were saying about understanding your skill set. You wouldn't apply to be a creative director right out of school, right? You'd probably apply to be a junior designer or production designer, right? So what fits what best for you, but understanding where that could take you at that company as well.
Part of that is also a function of the size of the company you go to, which is what was attractive to me to working for smaller firms, is that I was just thrown in a pool. I didn't know what I was doing, hired straight out of school without working, and the red lines on my drawings were unbelievable, but I learned a ton fast because I was just thrown in. There was nobody else to do it. I worked for a 2-person firm, and my boss didn't draw. So I drew everything. No idea what I was doing, but I learned very fast. But there was a cap, right? Within 2-3 years, I was at a ceiling of that firm, and it was time to move on to something else. Where in a larger firm, you could spend a whole career there if you want to. There's always room to grow. So kind of jumps back to something I said earlier about where to send your resume. Carefully think out, like, what do you want to do? How much responsibility do you want? Do you want the recognition of being able to point down a highway and say, I worked on that large building, where most of my work you can't see? I don't need that, and I'm good with that. Some people aren't. So, like, what do you want out of your career? What do you want to be?
And it is important because what I'll tell you is his client base and my client base are probably 180 degrees apart, you know, but at that level you get to know the people. They're almost become friends of yours unless you screw up. So there's a very personal tie to your client base, especially in a home. It's very personal, and it takes a special person to deal with the individuals that it's their home versus a 100,000 square foot office building for a developer that doesn't have the emotional connection to the building. It's a different, I'm going to use the word game, but it's not a game. It's just a different way of looking at it. You know what I mean? And you know, I would, you know, perhaps you were fortunate, right? I had 8 jobs before I decided, small, medium, large, kind of moved through them all. Geographically, architecture is different. Detroit, LA, Miami, Boston, Chicago. You know, there's some iconic places to go. Detroit is a beautiful place. It has a great heritage of what's here. But each of those regions have a different view of what this profession is. Some demand different levels of respect depending upon where you're working. So that not only what I would suggest if you're uncertain about the scale of what you're chasing is the idea of multiple jobs every few years. And part of this is expected because we don't expect folks who are coming out of school to know exactly what they want. And you know, between the educational process that you'll receive after your graduate or your 5th year or your 4 years at the firm, you know, will start to help you. And even if that position seems nearly meaningless, there is value in what you're learning to make you a better whatever you're going to become. I remember when I had to do that, even though I'm on top of the heap right now deciding what this building looks like, that wall detail that I understand how it puts together helps me design a better building. In the 3 years of wall details or floor plans or whatever happens, it doesn't seem very, very useful at the time. But to be a well-rounded architect and be able to understand the components of a building really makes for a stronger design. So don't underestimate any task you get, from paperwork to what seems menial, but because it's a piece of the larger scale puzzle that you'll need to know about if you're going to be the best professional you can. And I'm sure that's clear in a lot of professions, and graphics the same way. There's steps you're going to go through to be able to understand what it takes to put the puzzle together nicely.
Yeah, I can speak to that from a graphics perspective. My first professional job out of college was at a mattress manufacturer, and there was 2 designers on the marketing team. So I got to do a lot of everything. I even got to run a photo shoot by myself at one point, which was really cool, but I did hit a limit. I eventually was promoted, and my boss and I were at the same level. So what am I going to do, right? And so I was like, maybe I'll try agency life, and that I went into agency life and much bigger companies. So you'll learn as you go the pros and cons and what works best for you.
Well, we're coming to the end of our allotted time, so I wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. Do any of you have questions about anything regarding the resume, the interview process, or just looking for a job?
Is that a CoAD professor or? Okay.
How old is he? No, this is important, believe it or not.
He's older than me.
Okay, so that's the white paper, black print, line it up, justified, bang, bang, bang. That's my school, right? That's where I would be, where I've always been. Of course, I haven't worried about that in quite a few decades, as opposed to where these guys are. And I almost spoke up when you talked about designing the resume and said, ooh, don't do that because you might miss. Keep it clean, simple. You know, when I was doing this, white paper only, black ink, you know, usually left justified, but I can go on and on about what I'd like to see. And there was none of the thrills and fashion, no photographs. It was just a scripted outline of the individual's work process, done in just immaculate contrast between the paper and the ink. Done. Simple, powerful, you know, but times are changing. I don't interview When I interviewed, I didn't interview on a laptop. I didn't have a movie of my work. You know what I'm saying? I didn't send it around electronically. You walked it in a portfolio case. And I think I even used a typewriter once for a resume. So, you know, there's generational differences between what the expectations of the different fields are. So I'm with your instructor. Are you a graphics guy? So industrial design? Yeah. That probably is not a good plan for you. I would argue with him. You know what I mean? And if you're lucky enough to get somebody who's set in their ways like I am, only on white paper, but I would think at an industrial design level, you ought to have an industrial design resume, not one set for IBM or General Motors in the 1960s. That's not what we're doing today.
You can still design it and make sure that a computer can read it, right? So if you're using a font that you got off defont.com, like a fancy font, right? Not everyone's computer's gonna have that font, it might break, right? So you can be careful to use system-safe fonts, so fonts that are preloaded on Microsoft, right? You can also test your resume, open it in Adobe Acrobat PDF reader, and you can hit the edit PDF, and if it selects text as text, it means that a computer can read it as text. So be careful about the types of fonts. If you're layering your text over images, it's gonna be hard for the computer to read. So you can still design it, but you can check it and be intentional that it could still be read by a computer and be on the safe side as well. But I've always experienced like uploading my resume and then also having to fill out a form where I literally copy and paste things from my resume. They ask for most recent job and then all of that. So that's what I've experienced. I haven't experienced any type of the computer reading it personally.
Yeah.
A logo, yes, but don't go overboard. Like, don't put a picture of yourself. Don't put things just to add things, right? Be intentional. I think a logo is a very good use of graphics.
Yeah, I'll be quick. I know we're running out of time, but I agree with these guys. But design doesn't have to be graphic, doesn't have to be colorful, doesn't have to be photos. Design is, you know, minimalist architecture is very well designed, but it's minimal, right? So clean, aligned, good font, that's can be considered well designed.
Yeah, and I don't. In my world, the font's not going to get you or lose you the job because you found something funky online. That just doesn't make it. I hear you.
So going through this entire panel, we talked about the process and such, but what if at the end you're still rejected? Are you allowed to call the company or whoever was your interviewer to ask for an in-depth reason why you were rejected?
I think you certainly can reach out, and a follow-up is not a bad thing. Feedback.
Yeah, you know, I dabble in academia a little bit. You can see that. So when I move through the professional world, there is a value to me giving back to young students to help them better understand. I think you're going to get caught up in an individual by individual personality game there. I would more than happily, because the succession of the profession is what I'm living for, right? We need to understand what we did wrong, move forward, especially if it was a very close interview and you did something so minimal, but it was enough just to tip the scale. I think you ought to know that you were there, except this guy answered the question a little bit more whatever. You know, because so to lose doesn't mean you lost by much, it's just we don't remember second place, right? So especially in a multi-stage interview, it would behoove you to try to ask, because you'd like not to repeat that problem when it's down to 3 people. You know what I'm saying? So I would hope the individual that interviews you would be willing to do that, you know, but I think that's going to be a crapshoot.
Yeah, it's going to be a hit or miss. It doesn't hurt to ask, but you might find majority of the time maybe you won't get a reply. But I would advise to also find a mentor in the field outside of, you know, interviewing with people, so that you could go to that mentor and say, hey, I got this far in the interview process, and you could talk about it. Maybe they could identify ways you can improve, or maybe identify something you did possibly wrong or could fix. So having that type of person you could go to multiple times rather than getting those pieces of information that you may or may not get as feedback.
I would, the advice I might give is, no matter what your profession is or what you're studying, each one of your instructors knows a dozen people that can help you and that are willing to help you. It doesn't mean when you network you need to get outside the knowing distance. There are ways to find key individuals with the people you already know. I get calls all the time from, hey, would you mind meeting with blah, 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 because he's looking for or she's looking for something specific. So there are instructors, and that network is older and more established than your network, but because of your association with that professor, you're part of that network. And there's nothing wrong with using what God gave you, if you will, to be able to get through the system.
Well, unfortunately, that's about all the time we have, and so I want to have a round of applause for our panelists, and then maybe you could ask them informal questions. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And I think there's some pizza left. Maybe no pizza. Too late. All right. Have some salad, and have a good spring break.